All right, grab your Bible, open them up to 1 Timothy chapter 5. If you are already looking at that, then you are beginning to see, hey, we are rounding the end of our journey in the book of 1 Timothy. We're in week 10. I can't believe it. We're already, this is week 10 of our series. And so we've got a few more weeks left. And man, this is where it starts to get, I know it's been good for me, but it starts to get even better. And so we'll be in 1 Timothy chapter 5 for today. And, church we've talked a lot about this, where church is about, the Bible uses language like it's a body. It uses language like we've talked about, obviously the good fight is very like you're a soldier. You're a part of a nation, a holy nation. You're a tribe in a sense. You are a myriad of different things that the church is related to with regard to what we are. But also a church is also something that, is something you're very aware of. It's something that you live with every single day. Church is also like a family. Let me give you an illustration of what that might look like. A couple of months ago, maybe several months ago, long after everybody was already gone from church, Tyler and I were standing out in a lobby and we were talking. And I don't remember what we were doing, but it was one of those like impromptu meetings that just started to happen. And as we were standing there having a conversation, a car pulls up. And I thought somebody left their Bible, or a kid left their little lovey, or maybe it was a purse, who knows. But we didn't recognize the vehicle, and then out of the car were several adult men and several young students. And as they pulled on the door, it was already locked, and so we went over there, we let them in. And I got to be really honest with you and transparent. We kind of ghosted them for a second because we didn't recognize them. We didn't know what it was. Just being honest with you because they looked a little suspect. But then as we started to have a conversation, we learned that they were in desperate need of some help. This was a church. This was congregation members of another church in the Fairfield area that our church, many, many, many years ago, actually gave them a church building to start a Hispanic church work in Fairfield. And so they had been there many years. And then they told us the story of, hey, we've had a lot of problems, and our pastor is not listening to anything that we're saying. He is literally spending the church's money on private resources for him and for his family. He started to teach the prosperity gospel, and the doctrine has started to wane. And we've talked to him multiple times, and we don't know what to do. And I'm like, I don't know why you're coming to me. I'm not the bishop. Like, there's no way. I didn't even know you existed. Like, I didn't even know there was a church that was connected to us many, many years ago. So I got them connected with one of the people in our network of churches that can kind of help moderate some of these tension problems with their church. And then I was in one of these meetings months after that Sunday. It came out in this meeting. It was a line item on the agenda that this particular church had disbanded. And these members have been displaced throughout the community. And the story of how that happened was one particular Sunday, the pastor had enough with the congregation, and he treated them more like pawns, things that you could just kind of deal with, throw away. The widget didn't work, so I'm going to go move on to some other widgets and create some other environment. Do you know what he did? He called immigration on his entire congregation because most of them were undocumented. That pastor did not love those people, did not love those people. They were cogs in a system for him, and it broke my heart. Truth be told, they're now in Northern Kentucky under godly, qualified leadership, and that community is now thriving. I think it's like 300 or 400 people now, and God allowed that displacement to happen, but that pastor didn't recognize that the church is not an organization. The church is not just a group of people that when you don't like it, you can just, you can cash in and get some new ones. You can just go after a new model, get some new people. That's not the way that this whole thing works. Sure, when you get people in a room, there are multiple opinions, right? like when people gather and churches gather, there's all kinds of opinions that kind of begin to surface when you start asking people their opinion on things. You stick around a church long enough, you're going to experience disagreement, you're going to experience tension, you even are going to experience some conflict. What do you do when you face conflict? What do you do in a church when you face conflict like that pastor and his congregation couldn't get along? What should you have done? What should he have done in that situation when there was so much rub, there was so much tension, there was so much awkwardness? Well, the big idea for today is that the church is designed to function like a family. It doesn't function like a business. It doesn't function like an organization. We're not focusing on org charts, leadership structures. We don't do business meetings. That's not the way it works. Churches aren't designed like that. Churches are designed like a family. Now, families pay bills. Families got a little bit of financial structure to it. But when it comes to conflict, you deal with church conflict the same way that you deal with a family. That's how you deal with it, is you sit around a kitchen table. You have a family meeting in the living room, and it's a little bit more casual than formal, and you do it with the aim. 1 Timothy chapter 1 tells us the aim is love. That's the context of all of this, is love. It's mutually beneficial. It's mutually encouraging. And so if you hang around here long enough, you're going to experience tension. You're going to experience disagreement. You're going to experience conflict. You get a part of a community of people. You get connected into a community group. You're part of a serve team. Somebody's going to say something that's going to get under your skin. It's going to bother you. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And you have a choice to make. Do I check out and just go to the next place? And guess what's going to happen? It's going to happen there too. Or do I stay? Do I fight the good fight of the faith for healthy church community? And do I endure with this thing? And do I do it well? So there are two things we're going to see, two main points, okay? You're going to have care and you're going to have counsel. So there's an element of care that goes two ways, from the pastor to the congregation, from the congregation to the pastor. Then there's counsel, counsel from the pastor to the congregation, from the congregation to the pastor. You with me? Are you with me? Okay, thank you very much. You're very enthusiastic. So we're going to embark on this. We're going to see it in real time. We're actually going to see it in the whole chapter of 1 Timothy 5. It makes a lot of sense. I want you to stand with me. We're going to read it. If you get tired legs, then don't stand, and you can just sit. But here we go. Are you ready? All right, let's do this. He says, chapter 5, verse 1, "Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, in all purity. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and to make some, sorry, a little catch in my throat there, and to make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God, and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows when their passions draw them away from Christ. They desire to marry and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scriptures say, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wage. Do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging. Do nothing from partiality. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor partake in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. The sins of some people are conspicuous, going before them to judgment, but the sins of others appear later. So also good works are conspicuous. It's a lot of reading. Give me some grace here. And those that are not cannot remain hidden. This is God's word for God's people. Amen? Some of you are already hyperventilating. You're like, we're going to be here all day. I promise you we're not. I promise. Point number 1, remember, is care. And there's specific things that we are called to care for. So the first one is this: care for the people in the church like you care for your family. Look around really quickly, around you, front, back, side to side. What you might not know is that these aren't just people that you do an event with on Sundays at 10 o'clock. This is your spiritual family. If you're a Christian today, this is your spiritual family. If you are not a Christian today, you can put your faith and trust in Jesus, and then you just got adopted, as Lauren read this morning, into God's family, and you now have spiritual mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. You have a spiritual family. What's interesting is that God chose in all of language, he chose a specific way to relate to his creation. He chose familial language. He is God. Matthew in the Lord's Prayer says, our Father who's in heaven. We relate to God as a spiritual father and provider, caretaker, guardian, protector. That's what a good, godly father would do. And so we relate to God as Father. That means we are what? Sons and daughters. We have siblings in the family of God. The scripture calls us a family, and so we relate to one another in familial terms. God even gave us a connecting point with who? His one and only Son, John 3:16 tells us. And so we have access to God through our big brother Jesus, who did what we couldn't do for ourselves, and he, like a good big brother, took the punishment for the rest of his siblings so that we could, by God's grace and through our faith, be saved and have a right relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so God has chosen throughout human history to relate to his prized creation, human beings, in familial terms. So we are a family. Go ahead and say that. Say, we are a family. We are a family. And every time God's church gathers, it's very similar to the way when your church gathers. When your family gathers at Christmas, or maybe a family reunion or a birthday, how many of you have ever experienced conflict at those events? Anybody? Raise your hand. Good old-fashioned disagreement at Christmas. And it's probably not over sweet potatoes. It's probably over something else. And it can be super, super intense. And so what do you do in those conversations? Well, what you do is you have conversations with them, and you confront like you would a family, same way you would do in church. You don't put people on blast. You don't ignore them. You don't sweep it under the carpet. You actually meet the confrontation head on, and you do it with the pretext of, I'm going to love. No matter what, I'm going to love you. So let's look at the text really quickly. And it says very first out of the gate, do not rebuke. Circle that word, rebuke. What Paul is telling Timothy is he's saying, listen, you've got a hefty load ahead of you. You're going to have to confront the wonky teaching. You're going to have to confront what these people believe about pastors, what they believe about the gospel, that it's only for a certain group of people. That was a long time ago when we talked about that. Do you remember that? That like the gospel is for all people, open wide doors of opportunity for all people. And they've said, no, it's really for just this select group of people. You've got a lot of confrontation that's going to happen. And you got a lot of leaders in the church that you're going to have to confront. And I don't want you to rebuke them. That word rebuke means to come at angry. It can also even mean to be like even physical. It could even mean that he takes them out back and like gives them a pounding. It could even mean that. But it's really to come at angry, like like that kind of anger. That's what rebuking is. If you have ever had a dog that you're trying to housebreak, you know what rebuking is. You have felt that just, oh my gosh, why do you not do that? We don't potty in the house. Well, part of the problem is you're bringing an animal that's supposed to be outside on the inside, and you're trying to treat it like a human. Just saying out loud. It's fine, though. I get it. I think dogs are precious. But another sermon for another day. But so we've got to come at this with family terms, and we've got to confront like family. So Paul tells us, how do we do it then? He says, don't rebuke, don't get angry, don't come at them, don't get physical, please. Don't get physical. What you do is you encourage. Now, that word encourage in the text, you'll see that in verse 1. I want you to circle it. There's an interesting connection with that word. The Holy Spirit is known as the Comforter, which is the word paraclete, and it means to come alongside of and to encourage. So if you could see the Holy Spirit come alongside you when you're in a funk, when you're depressed, when you're anxious, when you're worried, the Holy Spirit comes along like a gentle comforter and points you to what? He points you to truth. He points you to Jesus and what's real. And that's what the Holy Spirit does. And what Paul does under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit uses a word very similar to that. And he uses the word parakaleo. And it means you as a person. I want you to confront like the Holy Spirit comes to you, come alongside you, put your arm around this person, get real close, like heart to heart, chest to chest. And I want you to walk alongside with this person and point them to the truth. He says in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, to preach the word. He then says to Timothy, he says to reprove and rebuke and exhort with complete patience and teaching. So you come alongside of somebody in family when you're confronting and when there's a disagreement, you come alongside them, put your arm around them, and you can gently confront. You can gently rebuke with the truth of the Word of God. That's how Paul wants Timothy to do this. So he lays before him kind of some terms. He says, I don't want you to rebuke, I want you to encourage, and then this is where the family dynamic starts to come into play. Notice what the text says. He says, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him. Encourage him as a father, as you would a father. Think about this. Has anybody just, honest moment, has anybody ever had to confront their dad before? Anybody just raise your hand? Honest moment, got some hands? Awesome. So you know what this is like. You had an opportunity to be really frustrated and angry at his behavior, or you could take a step back and you could call him up. You don't just call him out, but you call him up. And you do it with a sense of respect. Many years ago, my kids were real little, and we were with my parents, and my dad just, unfortunately, had just this, I don't know how to say it, but sometimes the things that he watched weren't necessarily inappropriate, but they're inappropriate for like a 7-year-old. And some things that he would say weren't necessarily always inappropriate, but inappropriate for a 7-year-old to hear. And so he was just really casual like that, and his conviction level was pretty low on those things. And me and Joy were, at that time, we were hanging out with him a lot. And we were like, oh my gosh, like we go home at night and we were talking like, I can't believe my dad said that. I can't believe he thinks it's appropriate to say that around my kids and let my kids hear all of that stuff. And, you know, it kind of push came to shove, and we're like, Dad, I got to be real with you. Like, you can't talk like that around our kids. Like, you just can't do that. Like, they look at their papa and they love him and they respect him. And when you say things like that, it gives them permission to say things like that. It gives them permission to watch things like that. And they're 7 and they're 6, and we can't do this, and you can't do that around our kids, or we're just going to have to kind of like hit pause on hanging out for a while. We called him up, and there started to be some change in that. I'm not saying it's easy. He says, then you confront your other older women in the church like mothers. Anybody ever had to confront their mom before? Kind of overstepping your boundary, Mom. This is our family. Sorry if I touched a nerve. But what do you do? How do you do it? With tenderness, tender in your tone. It's okay to be firm and tender at the same time. Essentially what the Apostle Paul is saying to Timothy is he's pointing out what we learned in the book of Exodus in the 5th commandment to honor your father and your mother. He's saying you're going to have, Paul's telling Timothy, hey Tim, you're going to have some older men and women in your church, and the greatest way to see transformation happen in their lives in the context of community is to have a young pastor come at those older women and older men in the church and confront them the way that you would confront your mom, Tim. And you would do that with tenderness. You would do that with love. You would do that with the desire for unity. You're not just going to call them out and put them on Front Street, and you're not going to do it like, you're also not going to do it passive aggressively, like drop it in a meeting and hope that they picked up on it. You're not going to do that. You're just going to meet that confrontation head on, and you're going to do it with love in mind and unity as the goal. And Tim, it's going to go well for you when you do that. Then he says, you've got younger men in the church, and I want you to confront them like you would talk to your brother. Now, I know this is interesting. I didn't grow up with a brother, but I always wondered what it would have been like to have a brother, but I'm raising 2 little brothers, and so I know what that looks like. It's all about dominance. It's who has more testosterone than the other, and who can pen the other fastest. And in our house, Roman always says, one day when I'm older than you, Judah, that's never going to happen, man. It's never going to happen. Now, Roman might be bigger than Judah one day, but he's never going to be older. And so it's always about who can pounce the other. And what Paul is saying is hey, that doesn't solve anything. It doesn't solve anything. Well, what you need to be is you need to be like your big brother Jesus, and you need to come under and serve him, and you need to have mutual respect with them. When you see a brother going off the deep end, sometimes they need a little yank, and that's fine. Sometimes they need a little yank back into reality, but most times, the best way to confront them is with mutual respect. And then he says you've got younger women in the church. And younger women in the church, Timothy, I want you to confront them with confrontation and deal with them in family life like you would a younger sister, with all purity. Now, that is an interesting phrase. And that actually tells us a lot about what was going on in the church at Ephesus. Apparently, there were leaders in that church and other men in that church and other people in that church that would look at these young ladies with flirtatious eyes. And they thought a lot about impure things with those ladies. And Paul says that's not what a godly leader does. A godly leader approaches those young ladies like you would a young sister. You wouldn't do anything immoral and impure with your sister because that is disgusting. And that is incest. And so when you see pastors in this day and in this age grooming instead of guarding young daughters of the faith, you see them groping instead of being a guardian. Paul's saying you are creating spiritual incest, and it's disgusting. And you have no business being a leader. Your job as a guardian is to protect them like you would protect and stand in for your younger sister. What is wrong with you? You feel the weight of that. It's pretty weighty. He says, so this is not, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but when you confront these people, you've got now a context to do this. You got sisters and brothers, fathers and mothers, with the goal of unity and love. And I don't want you to be afraid to do it. Anybody afraid to have that confrontation? That's hard. But he says, I want you to confront because you're a family, and I want you to do it like you would confront a family. Notice this, we care for the people in our church like you care for your family. Number 2, you care for those hurting in the church with discernment. So you're going to treat people like family, and then you're going to care for those hurting in the church like with discernment. Now, maybe you know this, maybe you don't know this, but in Timothy's culture, let me give you a little context. There are two people groups that are thought of as like the bottom of the barrel, like just in their minds, got no shot. Anybody know what those two people groups are? Anybody? Take a stab. Widows and orphans. Widows and orphans. Like there's just, can you imagine losing your parents as a little child? Like there's nothing for you to do. What do you do? Imagine losing, in their culture, the men were the ones that did all the work. There wasn't really a lot of conversation around the professional woman. There were some in Scripture, and you can see them, but not very many of them. So when you lose your husband, you lose your income, you lose your well-being, you lose your protector, you lose everything. And these are the most vulnerable of society. And the beauty of Christianity was that Jesus, what did he always do? He always went to those little children, did he not? He even said, you got to come to me like the little children come to me, like with this just unbelievably childlike faith. And then how many times did he go to the outcast woman in the Gospels and minister to her and heal her and set her free and preach the gospel to her? Many times. Even his little brother eventually wrote this in James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion before God, the Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. That is the unique marker of a genuine Christian movement, is to take the bottom rung of society and culture and to lift them up and to help them. Now, you just don't help to help. You've got to help with discernment. Because what a lot of us do is we just want to shovel out resources and just help as many people as possible. And so we just start sending money every place. We start sending people every place. And you can feel overwhelmed in a community like ours where you look around our city and you're like, man, there's a million options to help people and a million people that we could help today. And so what happens is you're paralyzed by your analysis of opportunity. So you shouldn't feel the need to help everybody. I'll say that out loud. I know it feels weird to say. But you got to help with a spirit of discernment. So you got to discern. Now, notice where this all comes to head is with this problem of widows. Notice this in verse 3. Honor widows. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. So, where this discernment for caring for hurting people, obviously these widows have lost their spouse. Good day or a bad day, losing your spouse? Probably a super bad day. And so like to feel the weight of loss, they're hurting. Not only are they hurting emotionally, but they're probably now hurting on a very practical level as well. And so what Paul tells Timothy is, I need you to discern where the true widow is. And start here. Does she have a family? If she's got a family, this is her family's responsibility to come in, swoop in, bring their resources, bring their time, and bring their energy to now help her because she has experienced traumatic loss. She's now your responsibility if she has family. Notice what happens if they choose not to do this. Skip over to verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So if in this context, if they had family and the mom loses her husband and they say, Mom, you got to figure that out on your own. We got a lot of stuff going on. We're raising a family here. We got a business we've started, got all this stuff we've got to take care of. You just kind of need to go figure out your own thing. Paul says to Timothy, it'd be better if somebody was lost than to treat their own mother that way. What's interesting about this is in our day and our age, this is interesting for us as Westerners. Because we read this and we go, what? Now our compassion kicks in and we're like, I kind of get that, but compassion and practicality rarely, if we're honest, meet on the same road. And so what happens in the West, we prize our independence. We want to raise children who are not codependent upon us and who can if they're living in your basement at 25, we've still got problems. If you're paying for everything and they don't have their license yet, and come on, you need to kick them out, okay? I'm just telling you right now, kick them out. They need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, especially if it's a man. Sorry, a boy. So here's the issue. In America, what we do is we prize independence, we prize individuality, we prize progress. And so go to college, get your job, get an income, go get your stuff. And then that is good for the most part, but then it has a very dark side of abandonment of our elderly parents. And I got to be real with you, I feel the weight of that big time because I live 1,000 miles from our parents, both sides. And I've got a dad who has a debilitating disease. It's getting worse and worse. I feel the weight of having a potential widowed mom. I feel it. And so in the West, we don't understand this. And so I was reading this anthropologist, Jared Diamond. What a great name, Jared Diamond. And he points out the aging population in the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Our elderly parents are living lonely lives, separated from their children and lifelong friends. So guess what happens? They move into retirement communities, assisted living facilities, and nursing homes, which are the saddest places on planet Earth. The saddest places on planet Earth. While we're over killing it, running our business, creating new space for our family, doing a new flower bed project, building this sweet deck off of the back of our house, getting the promotion, and we're off grinding it out, doing this really fun stuff, and our parents are left to hang out with all their other old friends, and C5 died last week. I don't know if it confronts you like it confronts me, but it's pretty harsh. The flip side is the Eastern mind, the Mediterranean families, like in the Bible era, is kind of like my big fat Greek wedding. You guys know it. It's literally multiple generations living under one roof. Like great-grandparents, grandparents, mom, dad, like little brothers, little sisters. And so literally in that particular paradigm, everybody gets taken care of. This is not how it is predominantly lived in America. This is not how it's lived. Why do you think there's so many nursing homes, so many retirement facilities, so many assisted living facilities that cost thousands and thousands of dollars a month to put our elderly parents in so we can forget about them? And Paul is saying, Timothy, that's not what it means to be a Christian. What it means to be the family of God is to welcome them in. Now, you got to discern her situation. Is she a real widow or is she a fake widow? We'll talk about that in just a second. But notice the situation in verse 5. It's very clear. She who is truly a widow is left all alone. All alone. By herself. She's got nothing. Has her hope set on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. What that means is she's trusted in God and she has to continue to trust in God because she can't trust in anybody else. Nobody's there. So if she has a family, lock it in. Family, this is real. So for some of us, this might be a real conversation that's like, oh, shoot. I've been going about this all wrong. I probably need to open my mind a little bit to what God might have for me and for my family. And I get it. Some of us can't be near our families for whatever reason, but it doesn't mean that we should forget about them. Amen? Stay dialed in. Stay locked in. Whatever they need, help. Now, if they don't have family, what do you do? Well, we've got to discern their did you know there's qualifications for pastors, elders, and deacons? There's also qualifications for getting help in the church. Do you know what those are? No, you don't know because you haven't read it yet. So I'm going to read it for you, okay? Here's what it is right here. Look at this, verse 9. These are some qualifications for these widows to get support from the church. He says, let a widow be enrolled. Circle that word in your Bible, enrolled. It means to be put on a list. So there were some list people. You got any list people in the house today? Oh yeah, type A'ers love that. So you're like, sweet, got to have a list now. So there was a list. Apparently there are lists in the church. And we know this to be true. The first church confrontation was centered on this exact same issue in the book of Acts. There were some widows that were absorbing all the resources of the early church, and there were some other widows that weren't getting any help. And so they kind of created a little bit of a stir and said, hey man, we need some help over here. And then what did they do? They ordained some diakonos, some deacons, some servants. And they said, hey, can y'all get these resources all lined out so that we can make sure everybody's taken care of? Using the church's resources to make sure that these ladies who are hurting actually get the help that they need. And this is the same thing that kind of fleshes itself out in the book of Ephesians and in the church at Ephesus. There's a list that is there of who's a genuine widow and who's not a genuine widow. He says, let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age. So if you're younger than 60, sorry ladies, you're not getting any help. That's not fair. Well, why is that? Well, 60 is usually the age of retirement in the Bible. That's within that generation, that culture. They were basically, you're beyond the age of going and getting a paper route. Not that we do paper routes anymore, but you're not driving for Uber. Like, it's just not going to happen. Whatever that might be. But they're saying, you don't have a career ahead of you that you can go take care of yourself. Having been the husband of one wife, meaning she is a one-man kind of woman. She wasn't sleeping around on her husband. She was fully committed to her husband. She was faithful to her husband. Having a reputation for good works. She was a faithful follower of Jesus. He gives some qualifications of what those good works might have been. It's right here. If she has been brought up children, so she raised her children well. She's shown hospitality. She was open to community. She opened her home. She lived her faith in real time in front of people. She washed the feet of the saints. I know that feels weird. Nobody's wanting to wash your puppies. Trust me. Nobody wants to do that. But let me just say this. It's not about washing feet. You know what it's about? It's about showing humility. It's about being able to get low. That's the picture. She comes with a humble servant heart into the community where she lives. She has cared for the afflicted and has devoted herself to every good work. And what Paul is saying is that's the kind of woman that the church needs to rally around and to give resources to so that she flourishes and is successful in her life. But notice the comparison here. Young widows aren't the same as older widows. Both have experienced traumatic loss. To lose a husband, no matter the age, is terrible. Terrible. But a young woman losing her husband is not the same as an older woman losing her husband. How so? Well, notice this, verse 11. But refuse to enroll, don't put this girl on the list, younger widows. For when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Here's what happened. So, young girl loses her husband. She vows a vow of celibacy for the rest of her life. I'm going to serve Jesus with everything I've got. And meant it. Truly meant it. Like, I can't imagine marrying somebody else. That's her mindset. So she pledges her allegiance and loyalty to celibacy and her singleness for the rest of her life. Well, the reality is she's got the rest of her life to live. And so in that moment, as she begins to be restless in her singleness, and that restlessness, what it does is it leads to her own immorality. So she starts sleeping around, starts getting promiscuous. Notice what it says back in verse, verse 5. She who is truly a widow is left all alone, has set her hope on God, and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. Notice verse 6. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. It's this comparison of this girl has pledged to live a life of celibacy to Jesus, but yet what has happened is her own heart began to burn and desire physiologically because her life is literally out in front of her. So she's burning with this desire. And so then that's, you don't put that girl on the list because she's not really a true widow. Why? We'll show you in a second. Her idleness leads to sinfulness. Notice verse 13. Besides that, they learn to be idlers. That means they ain't got nothing to do. Going about from house to house, not only idlers, but gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So it all started in a really good place, but then what happened is their own sinfulness got in the way. Their idleness led to their sinfulness. So they started knocking on doors with all the other widows in the church, all the other younger widows in the church. And what they started doing was talking about her, talking about him, talking about them, stirring the pot of drama, stirring the pot. They were busybodies. And Paul is saying, this isn't good. Like, you're 23 years old. You've got a lot of life out in front of you. You need to invest your life into something else, not into stirring the pot in this church. This is literally like a biography of what was happening in this church. This is how this church started to get off the rails, where you had these girls that were running around stirring the pot in their church about who was doing what with who. And so Paul says the remedy is think about your future. Think about what you have in front of you. You got more time than the older widows have. This is Paul's remedy, verse 14. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. How many moms today feel like you're super busy? Raise your hand. Come on, raise your hand. Don't be lazy about it. There we go, thank you. Own that. You got a lot going on. You got a lot going on. So you probably don't deal with what everybody else is dealing with. Meaning, my mind is so boggled with how to potty train this child, or I'm dealing with a discipline issue with my teenager that's just not getting it. Whatever those issues might be, you're thinking about raising the family in your home, and that means you have less time to worry about what that other mom is doing with her kids and their family, or the other person down the road, or the neighbor across the street. You're focusing on making sure that your family stays alive and no kid kills another kid this week. That's the point. Paul's saying, hey, pour yourself into your family. Pour yourself into your husband. Pour yourself into managing your household, because when you do that, when you're busy with the things that God wants you to be busy with, guess what happens? You don't give the enemy an opportunity to use you to create division in the church. There's obvious abuse of this in the church at Ephesus. So you see, they're saying, you've got time. Go get married again. There's provision for that. You can do that. It's fine. And so what Paul tells Timothy is, I want you to care for them by teaching the church these things so everyone will be on the same page. Notice verse 7. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. The idea is this: get everybody on the same page. Because once everybody's on the same page, if they start deviating from these things, judgment's on their own. It's on them. Because now everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows. So sister just went rogue. Mom went rogue. So some of you are like, how in the world does this connect with us? Well, the obvious application is widows, obviously. If you've lost a husband, it's our responsibility, if you don't have family around you, to rally around you. I think about the single parent in our church that feels alone, all alone, day and night praying. God, I need your help. I don't know how I'm going to make this work today. I don't know how I'm going to get my kid to an orthodontist appointment. I got a meeting I'm supposed to be at, and I got to do this too. All these things. Like, that's the value of being a family. A family. You know, no matter how large a church gets, it's supposed to get smaller as it gets bigger. You know that? You're supposed to be in community with people. So you might not be able to know every single person in this room today, You really don't get to know people sitting in rows. You get to know people sitting in circles, in a living room, in a community group with somebody. And that's the primary place where most of this happens, where most of this care happens, to where you're helping shoulder the burden and responsibility of care of that person's need. So principally, what Paul is giving us, bigger picture, is that there are all kinds of needs in a church. All kinds of needs in a community. And there's no way that we could meet the individual needs of every single person, of every single moment, of every single day, and every single opportunity that comes our way. We can't do that. It's impossible. And it's not right for you to have that expectation, or us as team members, as pastors and leaders and elders, to have that weight as well. So what we do is we help like we would help our family, and the principle he gives us is help with discernment. You help with discernment. So when we hear of a need, that's why we ask questions. Somebody, that's kind of rude. Why would you ask? Somebody says they need some help. Well, we're going to ask because it's our job to discern whether this is truly a need. And if you've got family, biblically, we're supposed to shove that responsibility onto your family here. And if you don't, then it's our responsibility to say, oh, you need help with groceries? Let us know. We'll help take care of you. You got a cutoff notice because you can't pay for it? You don't have family that can help you? We got you. That's our job. So it's discernment over, here's a $3 word, benevolence ministry, over helping when you are really struggling with your family. So we're to care. We're supposed to deal with confrontation. And obviously there was a challenge here. What in the world is that? That is my phone right now. Are you kidding me? What in the world is that? Oh my gosh. I have no idea what that is. Oh my Lord, that's demonic. Nothing was even playing. I just turned it off. That is crazy. Something about sermons. What in the world? You don't how do you recover from that? Oh my gosh. They're always listening. Always listening. I thought it was one of you. I was going to wait. Unbelievable. I'm just going to stop using my timer on my phone from now on. All right, let's jump in. That is crazy. Point number 2, counsel. So there are things that there's going to be confrontation in any church. So you got to do it with care, but you got to be able to receive counsel. You as a church have to receive counsel, and I as a pastor have to receive counsel. So notice what he says here. Counsel for the church on how to care for their pastor. I would say, to be honest with you, this is the weirdest part of the sermon. Maybe more weird than the weird thing you just heard on my phone. I don't know what that was. But notice verse 17. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wage. So here's where this is going down. The church's job is to care about the work that the pastors do. The church's job is for you to care about the work that pastors do. What's the work that we do? It's preaching and teaching. That's what we're laboring on. And so you ought to care more about that than you care about anything else. That ought to be your top priority of freeing pastors, me, up to do the duty well. And there ought to be a level of respect about that work. That's what he's talking about. I know my work is different than yours, okay? And some of you are more physical on the jobs that you do. Some of your days are much longer than maybe even longer than my days. But no one's work is necessarily more important than someone else's work. There's no competition there. It's mutual respect for the work that you do, which I have. And there's mutual respect from you to me for the work that the pastor does. There's respect that's there. Now, if what I do is not respectable, then don't respect it. If it's obvious that there's no work being put in, then that's cause for confrontation. But if there's obvious work that's being put in, it's mutual respect over that work of preaching and teaching and doing it well. And then I want you to notice this. So the first part is about work and respecting the work, but the second part is care about their wage. This is weird for me to talk about, but I'm just going to talk to you about it anyway. It says they're worthy of double honor. There are misconceptions about double honor. Maybe it's, do I get double what I got last year? Which I am all about that. Is double somebody who does a bad job? Is it double the guy down the road? Is that what double honor is? Reality is those are misconceptions about what double honor is. Here's the reality. It means twofold honor. So it gets back to that respect. There's respect for the job that's done well. And the job done well is obvious. And let me just say this out loud, a little sidebar here. I'm not a CEO, okay? Like the church is not a business, an organization, it's a family. And so for some of you, I'm like a father. For some of you, I'm like an uncle. For some of you, I'm like a big brother. And that's fine. For some of you, I'm like a son. And I know that might be a little weird. But there's only a few of you that could actually be true. But my point is that we don't do this like a business. And so you shouldn't have an expectation of this CEO model leadership. It's different than that. Little sidebar, back to the reality of the conversation. Double honor is twofold. So it's respect and it's remuneration or recognition. It's financial. It is. So a church should take care of their pastor. 100% should take care of their pastor. When I was interviewing for one church one time, not this church, many churches ago, they were doing some research on pastoral salaries and what they were going to pay. And one of the people on the committee, that's how old school this church was, said, we learned that oftentimes when a pastor gets a new job at a new church, that's the only time they get a raise so that's why it's important to get this right the first time, because you might not get a raise for the entire time that you're here. Because churches have a tendency to be very stingy, or they're just really crummy with their management of funds, and so they can't give their church pastors raises. And so what do? That's why pastors leave often. Did you know that? Most of the times, not always, but most of the times, it's like, man, I can't afford to live here. When we first moved here, when they brought us here, they were like, man, we really like for you to live like in Terrace Park or in Marymount. And I was like, I'm sure you would. You should probably pay me more. That'd be great. Like triple what you're trying to pay me right now. Then we can maybe make that work. I mean, I'm all for Indian Hill if you pay me for it. That's fine. But that's not how that works. So I got some great wisdom from R. Kent Hughes and Brian Chappell on this. I just want to read it to you. I'll put it on the screen for you. They say, as a rule of thumb, both of these gentlemen are older, wiser, and been in their churches for a while. Says, as a rule of thumb, pastors ought to be paid on the same scale as others in the congregation of the same age, education, level of experience, and responsibilities. They should not live above or below their congregation, and it is generally better for the church to err on the plus side. I've heard it said like this: take money off the table so they never have to stress about it. To get that part off, just make it to the point where you're generous enough to where they don't have to stress and think about it all the time. It's one less thing to think about. So you have to think about that within the context of, as I get older, if I get a doctorate, do you have a doctorate? Any 43-year-olds have, you have to think about that. Like, what do we do with regard to experience level of 20 years on the job with a master's degree, blah, 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 blah. You just have to wrap your mind around that. I know it sounds weird for me to say that to you, but that's how you have to think about how do you take care of your pastor. That's one way you take care of it, is you think about it. And then if you got questions, you come talk to Tyler or me, or you just ask, what does that look like? Can we move on from that? Okay, cool. It's not like it's going to get any easier. Counsel for the church on how to confront their pastor. This is great. How do you do that? I'm actually borrowing these 3 little subpoints from R. Kent Hughes because he said it better than I could. He's first, confront with caution. Notice verse 19. Do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Confront with caution. Do you realize that bringing up an accusation against a pastor is a really big deal? Because it's really hard to recover from? Especially in the culture that we live in today, in cancel culture, to where like everybody's guilty until they're proven innocent, right? So when somebody says, can we just wait until the whole story gets out? That guy's judged hardcore. So when you got to be really, really careful about this. And now, I'm not saying that confrontation shouldn't ever happen. That's not true. But when you feel, what this verse does is it really helps us delineate between, did I just get my feelings hurt, or is there a serious issue there? The truth is that I can unintentionally hurt your feelings right now. I can remember it was several years ago, but there was a person who wanted to meet with me and told me they were leaving the church. And I was like, that's cool. They're actually wanting to meet with me? That's awesome, because most people don't. They just do some out and they go. So this guy met with me in my office many years ago, when the first year I was here. And he was like, man, that first Sunday you were here, I was on this front row and you said, and I'd stopped him. I was like, wait, dude, that was like a year and a half ago. You never gave me the chance to make that right. I didn't even know that. I had no idea that I said that and that hurt your feelings. If I would have known that, dude, I would have made it right then and there. And he just held on to it. So you can get your feelings hurt like that. One of our pastors can hurt your feelings like that. It can just happen. So what this does is this helps us wade between what is real and what is just, I probably just need to build a bridge and get over it. Like I'm being overly emotional about something, or maybe he was having a bad day, or maybe I'm having a bad day. It really helps us filter through, is this a real thing I should bring to the surface and talk to him about? And he says, you listen when there's 2, when there's more than one on the exact same issue. You proceed with caution because it's hard to overcome. John Calvin wrote about his time as a pastor in Geneva. Notice what he said. As soon as any charge is made against ministers of the word, it is believed as surely and firmly as if it had been proved. This happens not only because a higher standard of integrity is required from them, but because Satan makes most people, in fact nearly everyone, over-credulous, so that without investigation, they eagerly condemn their pastors whose good name they ought to be defending. We just want to believe the tea. We're prone to gossip. So the best gift that you could give our pastors at this church is when you hear gossip, your benefit of the doubt. And be gracious, because why? We're family, and that's what you would want your family to do to you. Somebody starts talking about your mama, what do? Oh, so you're just a wet noodle and you just take it? No, you defend them, right? You defend them and then you go say, hey, Mom, I heard, is that real? Yeah, it was real. Oh, shoot. Whoa, I got to have a conversation then. Like this just is different. Or I never said that. Oh, okay. So the best thing that we can do as a family, so specifically to your pastors and your leaders, is that when you hear gossip, you hear busybody traction happening. Here's the deal. Sometimes you're like, well, there's more than one person that thinks that. Sure, if they stirred up consensus and had secret meetings at other houses, lunch at Scramblers about what they think they can do better, Not that that's ever happened. Unless that happened and the Lord gave that to me, then he just shut you up. But building consensus is sinfulness. And so what this does is it really challenges how we confront. We got to be cautious. So the best thing you can do is shut it down if it only comes from one person. And those people are usually bullies. And once you confront them, they go somewhere else anyway, which is sad because they really need to be disciplined on that. So confront with courage. Number one, confront with caution. Number two, confront with courage. Verse 20 says, as for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all so that the rest may stand in fear. It's not going to be easy, but if there's blatant, unrepentant sin with multiple witnesses, you tell the church. Turn over to Matthew 18. This is what Paul is talking about. Here's the steps for actual biblical confrontation. Matthew chapter 18. Turn there with me. Matthew 18:15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. So, you hear some gossip. How do you deal with it, Summit? Have you talked to Aaron about that yet? Oh, you haven't? Then shut up. You don't have to say shut up. We don't say that word. That's a potty word. Hush. Shh. Stop. Don't say another word until you talk to him. That's how you shut that down. Then, what if can I say this? Any person that has ever had beef with me at our church, it's very few, but any person who's ever had beef with me that actually met with me, did we not have this conversation this week? They all walk away and go, dang, that was a lot easier than I thought. He actually listened. That was awesome. I mean, it wasn't fun, but I mean, I'm glad it's now over and we can move on and we're here. But if he doesn't listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Here it is. So he didn't listen. Cool, bring some people with you next time. Then guess what happens? Tyler or me or Lane feel the weight of that conversation. We're like, dang, this is real. I better hear this. And then you change. Okay, well, if the change doesn't happen, what do? Oh, verse 17, if he refuses to listen, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to even listen to the church, let him be to you as Gentiles and a tax collector. What does that mean? On the outside? On the outside. You take it public. And guess what taking it public does? It really filters small, little, teeny, weensy, little, I got my feelings hurt, to big issues. Oh, shoot, man. Like that is just my preference. It filters preference pretty quickly. You with me? So if you follow it, Matthew 18, it's the same principle you see over here in 1 Timothy chapter 5, is that you have to confront with some courage because it's not going to be easy, but going public causes you to reflect. If somebody comes and confronts one of our pastors and then none of us receive it, and then a group of people stand up before you and say, well, here's what we found out, and here's all the conversations that have been going on for months, and he's unrepentant, and he does not care and does not listen, guess what happens? 2 things happen. All the people who are a part of the confrontation process have had to remove the speck out of their eye or the plank out of their eye. There's been a self-filtering process. And then, as it's publicly happening in the rebuke process, you then, if you're in persistent sin, then what it does to you is you're like, oh, dang, this must be serious. This must be serious, ongoing, just doing whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, however I want to do it, with whoever I want to do it with. That must be a serious issue. And the Holy Spirit uses that to rebuke with patience and teaching. So you also confront with fairness. Verse 21, notice the audience. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging, doing nothing from partiality. You don't play favorites. You don't brush it under the carpet in the name of comparison. You're not unnecessarily harsh towards other people. It is legitimately fair. And while I am here, this is an issue we have at our church. Unnecessarily harsh towards people. I've heard it. You don't say it to their face. You say it to me. Or you say it to somebody else. Unnecessarily harsh towards somebody else. Playing favorites with a pocket here or a pocket over here. Can't do that. Can't do it. That's not who we are. That's not what God has called us to. He's called us to unity in the Spirit and the bond of peace. We're a family. So we don't favor one kid over another, right? No, we don't do that. We love them all. So we love our family, church. We love our family. Not unnecessarily harsh, not overly critical. We don't prejudge. What do? We don't show favorites. We love them all. We love them all. That's what we do. And if you're feeling the twinge like I felt this week of that, then you've got to say, Lord, God, break my heart. I don't want to be that way. I don't want to play favorites. I don't want that. I'm so grateful that God doesn't play favorites with us because none of us would qualify, right? So God, give me a heart like yours. Give me a heart like yours. I want to love like you love. Lastly, counsel for selecting pastors. It's very easy. Verse 22, don't be hasty on laying on of hands. You be patient when you're selecting a pastor. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in this church was early on, we had trustees, and I just immediately called those trustees elders with a biblical term without going through all of the qualifications. And I regretted it, and it came back to bite me many times. And so that's why we've been super patient, biblically landing who elders are. Elders are pastors, and pastors are elders. And we're patient because it's a big deal to call somebody an elder. You don't just do it to throw authority onto somebody. You don't do that. You're patient. It's also personal. He says laying on of hands. When you lay hands on somebody and you ordain them into ministry, you're saying, I believe in that man. I trust that man. That man is faithful. That man is going to serve you. Even when you're the most difficult to serve, he's going to do that. So you're patient and you personally invest in them and you personally endorse them. He goes on to say, so he says, keep yourself pure. And then he says, no longer drinking only water, but use a little wine. All the winos are like, that's my verse. That's my verse. For the sake of your stomach. So that, see, I should do that every day. For your frequent ailments. So that's a parenthetical statement in verse 23. Really, Paul is he's speaking personally to Timothy. Hey man, you got a little tummy ache, got a little rumbly in the tumbly? You can have a little wine, it's okay. It's because I think, this is my theory, Timothy was probably battling legalism on, I can't do it, 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 I can't do it. And Paul's like, yeah, bro, you need to relax. You know that that's going to be medicinal for you and it's going to help. So just calm down. It's going to be okay. But he says, keep yourself pure. Keep yourself pure. As you're wading through the life of a man and you're selecting him, keep yourself pure. Look at those qualifications. Are you living up to them? That's what he's saying. Select pastors with perception. Notice verse 24. Here it is. The sins of some people are conspicuous, going before them to judgment. But the sins of others appear later. So also good works are conspicuous, and even those that are not cannot remain hidden. Essentially what Paul is saying is hey, it's reaping and sowing, man. So when it comes to sin and it comes to life of righteousness and godliness, guess what happens? You're going to sow one of those. And your life is going to produce fruit. And so when you're selecting a pastor, you got to look at the fruit of a person's life. When you're selecting an elder, a leader, somebody to entrust your life with, you got to look at the fruit of their lives. Look at their family. Look at their relationships. What's the fruit of their lives displaying? If they're not close to anybody, man, that should tell you some things about them. They got some awkward relationships with their family. should tell us some fruit of their lives, what's there. Investigate that. Have some perception. Pay attention to what the fruit of their lives is producing. This is an interesting chapter, isn't it? It's like the most practical thing you can say, like that Paul could say to Timothy, hey, it's off the rails. Here's how we're going to get it back on. You got to deal with these people like family. You're going to have to deal with this widow issue. And you got to do it with discernment, man, because it's messy because there's emotions involved there. Ephesus, you got to take care of your preacher, man. This ain't easy talking to you. By the way, I'd say that too. This ain't always easy talking to you. You got to take care of them. You got to love them. You got to pray for them. You got to support them. One of the greatest ways you can support them is just respecting them, publicly and privately. You got to care and you got to get counsel. You got to receive it. There's this mutual like back and forth with care and counsel. Do you sense that? Like, hey, there's counsel for Tim. There's counsel for Aaron. There's counsel for Ephesus. There's counsel for Summit. It's back and forth. There's care and counsel all the time. The way we make this work is a 2-lane highway of care and counsel all the time. That's relationship. That's how it works. That's how we excel and fight the good fight of the faith. And we fight for a healthy church. This is how we get a healthy church. Principally speaking, caring and counseling, period. Because we're family. That's who we are. Not a business, not an organization. We are a family. You're my brothers and my sisters. Spiritual mothers and fathers. We're family. And so we don't leave, we don't ostracize, we fight for our family, right? That's what we do. Sometimes it's hard to be around family, but it doesn't mean you're not family anymore. Sometimes you disagree with your family, but it doesn't mean you're not family anymore. Sometimes you have to agree to disagree, but it doesn't mean you're not family anymore. Do you know what unites us? More than blood, more than last name. What unites you and me is the shed blood of Jesus Christ. So we can have all the diversity we want in opinions, but what unites us is something that will carry us on through eternity. It's Jesus. That's worthy of the fight to me.